So when I was in rabbinical school, I was a part of two programs. I was a rabbinic student, hence being up here on the Bima, and I was also a part of a nonprofit management program. And I had a cohort of classmates who were only in the nonprofit management program, and I was the only rabbi kind of in both of those things. And since I was a rabbi, I got exempted from a bunch of the Jewish focus classes in the nonprofit school since I was taking them in rabbinical school. And I remember distinctly always being incredibly jealous of my classmates getting to have one class in particular, I'm guessing you know what class it is, with Rabbi Joshua Garroway, because they always walked out of it so excited, laughing, and elated about random facts in Jewish history. And that was a group of social workers and communication master's students, and that is the love of learning that Dr. Garroway can instill in his students and still does to this day. Do you still teach that class?
It's a slightly different class, and it's online, but yes.
Slightly different class, now online, so maybe anyone can take it. But yes, he still instills that in students. Rabbi Joshua D. Garroway, PhD, is now the dean of HUC-JIR's Skirball campus in Los Angeles, from which I was ordained. He was ordained by the Cincinnati campus of HUC-JIR in 2003, and then earned his doctorate degree from the Religious Studies Department at Yale in 2008. He has written 2 books, one on Paul's Gentile Jews, neither Jew nor Gentile, but both, which explores the way in which Paul's epistle to the Romans constructs Jewish identity. And his second book offers the beginning of the gospel, Paul, Philippi, and the origins of Christianity, offers a revisionist understanding of the origins of the Greek term, I'm not going to say this right, apologies, Dr. Garroway, Eugalian-ish? Sure. Usually translated as gospel in earliest Christianity. His rabbinate is dedicated to instilling aspiring Jewish professionals an appreciation of Jewish history, texts, and ideas. And I'm so excited he's going to do that tonight with us, where he's going to be speaking to us about the learning as the foundation of Jewish life. He grew up in Rochester and has lived in Pasadena with his wife, also Dr. Garroway, who is also a professor at HUC, and their 3 boys.
Can people hear me? Okay. I just need to figure out my vision concept here. I'm at the age where I need 3 different kinds of vision, mid-range, short-range, long-range, but I think I can see. Before I get started, apparently the activity for tonight is to talk about your first time ever in this space. And this is my first time ever in this space. And we're supposed to talk about our feeling. I have to be perfectly honest, it's probably not the right thing to say on Shabbat, but I'm feeling a touch of envy. As Reverend Paris said, I'm from Pasadena. I'm actually from the synagogue that burned down last month. And so I loved our synagogue, but it was, a synagogue. This is like a synagogue. And, to come to pray in this space with this music and this clergy, I just hope you're all a little bit embarrassed by the riches. That's all I will say. I'm incredibly grateful to Reverend Paris and Reverend Bauer and Reverend Luck for sharing the Bima with me today. Thank you also to the B'nai Mitzvah family for sharing your simcha with me. It is a true delight to be here. And what I'm going to tell you is that I plan to speak for 15 minutes because Rabbi Bauer said that I could speak for 12 to 15 minutes. And truth be told, I am a rabbi. So I interpret that to mean 17 minutes, but then I decided at the last minute to be kind, and I have remarks that I think are going to last about 15 minutes. And what I want to do is first tell you all a story, one of the most famous stories in Jewish tradition, and then link that very briefly to the Torah portion for this week, and then finish by telling you a little bit more about who I am and why I'm here. So let's begin with the story. And the story tells the romance of an ancient Jewish woman named Rachel. She lived in the land of Israel during Roman times. And Rachel was the daughter of the wealthiest landowner in town. And as always seems to be the case in stories like these, she was beautiful. And many suitors came to win her hand, but she had her eyes on one of the poor shepherds who worked her father's land. His name was Akiva. Akiva was handsome, yes, but what Rachel admired about Akiva was his brilliant mind. Akiva was poor, however, and unlettered, brilliant but not learned. And so Rachel told him, "Promise me that you will commit the remainder of your life to Jewish learning, and I will marry you." And he did so, and they married. Now, her father, of course, was furious that Rachel spurned many wealthy suitors to settle for what he figured was some bumpkin from his fields, so he disowned her. Though rendered penniless, she remained committed to Akiva. She insisted that he leave town to go learn with the greatest rabbis of the day, for however long it would take until he came to be counted among their ranks. When he objected, not wishing to leave his new bride alone with no means to support herself, Rachel vowed that she would live in a barn, sleep on straw, and like Les Miserables, she would sell her hair to make ends meet. And so, Akiva went off to learn for 12 years. He returned after more than a decade away, now indeed one of the great rabbis of his day. But as he approached his home, he heard the voice of neighbors in his home admonishing Rachel about her deadbeat husband. "Oh, Rachel," they said, it's like straight out of, Real Housewives. "Rachel, he's never coming back. He doesn't love you. He's forgotten about you. Why don't you marry one of the wealthy men that you spurned long ago?" And what did Rachel say? "My husband has been gone for 12 years studying Torah. Were he to remain 12 years more, I would wait for him." And so Akiva, who was listening outside the door, heard Rachel say as much, and what did he do? Well, he turned around and marched himself right back to the academy to renew his studies at the study house for 12 more years. When he returned, now 24 years after, he had become, without question, the greatest rabbi of his day. Indeed, one of the greatest rabbis of any day. And he came with a retinue of hundreds upon thousands of disciples who hung on his every word. And as the entourage entered his hometown, Rachel ran out to meet him, and his disciples yelled, "Get out of the street, woman. This is a great sage passing through." And at that, Akiva stood up and proclaimed one of the most beautiful and famous lines in Jewish tradition, "Hakol shali v'hakol shalachem shalah." Everything that belongs to me, my great learning, which is everything that belongs to you, your great learning, belongs to her. And as you can imagine, the story ends up with them living happily ever after, and him becoming very wealthy and buying her lots of jewelry. I'm not going to digress. Now, this story, which is an incredibly famous story, appears in many versions in the Talmud. It is one of the famous saintly stories about our ancient rabbis. Now, is it true? Probably not. Is it as romantic as many are led to believe? Perhaps, but I'm not so sure. It seems to me that it is as much a story about marital neglect as it is about undying love. But one thing everyone seems to agree upon is the moral of this famous story. Namely, that there is no single value, no custom, no practice as important in Judaism as learning, what the rabbis call Talmud Torah, the study of Jewish tradition. Indeed, you may be familiar with another teaching of our ancient rabbis. It's recited daily in our morning liturgy, in which the greatest of all the Jewish commandments are enumerated. I could ask you, and I'm sure you'd provide the following: honoring mother and father, acts of kindness, welcoming strangers, visiting the sick, rejoicing with bride and groom, consoling mourners, and the prayer goes on. And yet then we are told, were all of these great commandments to be put on one side of a scale and Talmud Torah, Jewish study, placed on the other, the scales would balance. Talmud Torah keneged kulam, it is said. The study of Torah is equal to all of the other commandments combined. It is not really possible to overstate just how important learning is in Jewish tradition. Now, what has all this to do with this week's Torah portion? Directly, not a lot, but indirectly, an awful lot, as I hope to demonstrate. This week, as you'll see in your little program, we read Parashat Terumah, the first of several portions detailing the makeshift sacrificial temple called the Tabernacle that the Israelites constructed in the wilderness. Now, this portion, truth be told, is rather boring. It is the portion that I think typically puts an end to earnest efforts by Jews and Christians who vow to read the Bible from beginning to end. Such readers easily cruise through the fascinating stories of creation and the flood and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, and then they thrill at the burning bush and the 10 plagues and the Exodus and the 10 Commandments. And then comes Truma, in which the word cubit appears seemingly nonstop. We learn in painstaking detail about all of the materials of that tabernacle: the lengths, the widths, the hooks, the clasps, the sockets, the utensils, the colors. And it is here where most folks realize that reading the Bible cover to cover is not quite what they bargained for. So why, one might ask, does the Torah deviate from its exhilarating narrative to pursue so belabored a description of the tabernacle? And the answer, if it is not so obvious to us, is that the tabernacle was the single most important structure in ancient Jewish life. It was, in a very real sense, the home of God. It was where God dwelled on earth. It was where the Israelites encountered God, where they offered God animal sacrifices and petitioned God for help. It's where the will of God was ascertained, and such an important place warrants so meticulous a description. Now, those who know Jewish history, like the students who studied with me at the Hebrew Union College, will know that this tabernacle in the wilderness eventually became a permanent fixture, the so-called Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. But it was destroyed by the Babylonian Empire in the year 586 BCE. Now it was replaced 70 years later by the aptly named Second Temple in Jerusalem. But it was destroyed some 500 years later by Roman troops in the year 70. And all that remains of that Second Temple is a portion of its western retaining wall, that famous site in Jerusalem that no doubt many of us have visited. No third temple has been erected. Now, in part, that is because Roman and then Byzantine and then Muslim authorities prevented it. But more so, it is because the rabbis, The Jews who took the reins of the Jewish community following the destruction of the Second Temple determined that animal sacrifice to God was no longer to be the primary way, indeed, no way at all, to interface with God, no longer the way to encounter God or honor God or petition God or to ascertain God's will. What replaced sacrifice, of course, were two activities far more familiar to us: prayer, the offering of the lips, and study. And if the story of Rachel and Akiva tells us anything, it is that study held pride of place. And these activities required buildings different from the ancient temple. Prayer called for a synagogue, a gathering place, and by the way, that is precisely what synagogue means in Greek. It's a Greek word, gathering place, a gathering place where Jews could come together to offer their hearts to God and to one another. And the sacred act of study called for a Beit Midrash, alternatively translated as study house or study hall, though yeshiva or even rabbinical school might also be appropriate. And that is where I come in. The Hebrew Union College, where I am the dean on the Los Angeles campus, has been a bastion of Talmud Torah, of serious Jewish learning for 150 years. Exactly 150 years. This year is our sesquicentennial anniversary. If you're wondering why I know the word sesquicentennial, I grew up in Rochester, New York, which I think was founded in 1841, and when I was a boy in 1991, we celebrated our sesquicentennial. Well, the Hebrew Union College is celebrating that 150th anniversary. In 1875, the very first association of synagogues in America, what is now known as the Union for Reform Judaism, realized that Jewish life in America would be incomplete if synagogues were not complemented by a Beit Midrash, a robust site of Jewish learning where rabbis could be trained on American soil, where eventually cantors and scholars and educators and Jewish communal professionals could, like Akiva, study and train to serve the Jewish community. Now, if my history is correct, and that means if Wikipedia is correct, Congregation Emanu-El joined that Union of Reform Judaism just 2 years later, in 1877. The first synagogue in the West to do so, and here, I know my history is correct, Emanu-El has been served by countless rabbis and Jewish leaders over the years who have been shaped by their rigorous study, their Talmud Torah at the Hebrew Union College. In my own lifetime, that list would include great leaders you likely know: Stephen Pierce, Lawrence Kushner, Beth and Jonathan Singer, Ryan Bauer, Carla Fenvis, Jonathan Jaffe, Sidney Mintz, Cantor Reverend Luck, Rena Singer, my own students, Jason Rodich, Leo Fuchs, Sarah Paris, Noah Westreich. I could add scores more. And while I hope none of these rabbis would say that their years of study spent at the Hebrew Union College constituted the sort of sacrifice endured by Rachel and Akiva, and I have never known a student of ours to sell their hair to make ends meet, I trust that their learning with us was formative, and even more importantly, that they have shared their prodigious learning with this community, so that the paramount virtue of Talmud Torah, Jewish learning, has thrived here at Congregation Emanu-El. And may it be so for generations to come. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.